there was a communication happening across space and time between past me and future me. And what I was feeling, I knew this to be true, what I was feeling in the past while I was just starting recovery was future me, was healed me, was more powerful and worthy me. I remember very clearly, I was on my right side, kind of curled up in the fetal position, and I just surrendered. And because of that surrendering, because of that resistance being removed, and because I was open to receiving support, that allowed this experience to come in. And people ask me, what was that being, that intelligence? And I'm always very hesitant to say definitively, because I don't ultimately know. But what first showed up for me was Yogananda. One of my dear teachers changed my life when he said, you weren't afraid of death. You're not afraid of death. You were afraid of not living your purpose in this lifetime. Welcome to Soul Pod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. Welcome back, light beings. Today, I am going to share with you my near-death experience. I've shared this on other podcasts, but I haven't really gone in depth into about a year time period of my life that was extremely tumultuous, and from where many of my learnings, you could call it wisdom, has come from. And it's where really everything changed. And as we get into this, one of the first questions to ask here is, what is a near-death experience? So you know me, I love to start with definitions. So a near-death experience, this term has only been around for the last couple decades. Really, only in the last 5 to 10 years has this been more of a conversation in popular culture. And before this time, when this wasn't such a crazy thing to talk about, people who had had NDEs or near-death experiences thought that they had just, it was not something that they talked about. And quite frankly, if they did talk about it, especially in the hospital setting, they were oftentimes pushed towards psychiatry. And people telling them that that can't possibly be true, and it's just a function of the brain being starved of oxygen. Now, the brain does do some pretty amazing things, but one of the stories that I read prior to my experience was, I believe the book title is called Proof of Heaven. And what's so powerful about this book, especially for somebody who comes from the sciences, is that this was a neurosurgeon who he himself went through these realms of consciousness as he was in between life and death, really. So highly recommend that book because it's coming from somebody who actually had patients who had had NDEs, and he had tried to explain it through biology. So as far as what a near-death experience is, and then I'll tell you how my experience is slightly different than the maybe like standard definition. But oftentimes it involves somebody's heart rate actually stopping. It involves severe trauma to the body, severe illness. It involves usually some sort of out-of-body experience. It tends to involve an experience outside of what we can call this realm. And this is where it gets very mystical and esoteric. And my intention with sharing this with you today is not to convince you of anything, because ultimately, as I talk about in Soul Pod all the time, my desire is that, one, you develop the tools so that you can consciously enter these realms at will. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. And two, I share this because I think it can be helpful that hopefully some of what I went through will help other people not have to go through what I went through in order to learn what I learned. So that's really the reasons for sharing. But going back to the definition, so Another common aspect of an NDE is seeing the light. And I was surprised to learn that there's some controversy about this out in the spiritual world right now of whether or not it's the right thing to go into the light or not. And that maybe it's some sort of trick and that's how you end up in the reincarnation loop. That's a whole nother conversation. But in my experience, my limited experience, my intuition on this is that it is indeed the way to go. So we'll put that to the side. But that is a typical experience, is that there's some form of the light, there's some form of communication. There's oftentimes a life review. And a life review, many people will say, doesn't include any element of judgment. It's simply integrating where it was that you were in balance in your life and where it was that you were out of balance, where it was that you caused potentially pain to others. And you start to understand it from both sides of the coin as the experiencer and as the person that you were interacting with. You see their perspective, basically. So that's a near-death experience. And I have found that a lot of people, especially those who eventually become teachers or guides, tend to have had something on the gradient of a near-death experience, right? And I think we have to be very careful here that there is a gradient of experience and that there is no like right or wrong NDE. Like it is only your experience, right? And if we've learned anything with the life reviews, is that judgment's just not a part of it. So here we go. So I'll take you back about 6-7 years ago. And I had already had a Kundalini awakening at this point. I'd already been meditating very seriously for a number of years. And I was teaching as well. So I didn't necessarily have this experience and then that come from it. I will share with you what totally accelerated though after it. So the pandemic hit in 2020. And interestingly, I was in a meditation intensive, a training that January. And in that training, I started to perceive something coming. I did not realize that at the time, but I could feel something. I would see it in my meditations. It was like a wave of destruction, which is unnerving because I don't usually see that in my meditations. And I was starting to get a glimpse of this man, this what I later learned to be a lifetime of mine. Now, this is going to get really trippy, so just buckle up, grab your matcha, and this will be quite the journey from the mystical perspective. And so in my meditations, I was having premonitions. I was seeing war, but I was seeing also disease. And it was super vivid, super vivid. And I was seeing this man that was kind of caught in between it all. We'll loop back to that. And so I worked in biotech at the time. And so when the pandemic a few weeks later started to hit the media, I was working with a number of different organizations trying to make sure that we were communicating regarding testing, regarding what was coming in the most efficient way that we could, given the very limited information that we had. And I share this because I was on the phone with the director of a major medical institution. And I was talking with him. And it was a moment where I could feel something came into my space. And I was like, I'm getting it. I've got it. And that physician, he was a physician, helped to walk me through the very early stages. And for me, up until that point, and I'll be very transparent, I was a bit of a hypochondriac, meaning that I was always trying to optimize my biology. I was always trying to be on top of it. A super type A, very productive, served me great in my biotech career. But when it came to health, I was having all kinds of weird occurrences in my body. And that's been one of my biggest teachers in my spiritual journey is developing a new relationship with my body. We'll come back to that. So there was a lot of mental angst that set in at that time. And the reason the angst was even more intense than any other time in my life is it was quite literally the thing I was probably most scared of at the time was some unknown virus, and I'm on the early wave to get it. Like, oh my gosh, mentally, human Crystal, having a very hard time. But I'm trying to work my way through it. And as the days go on, I get sicker, I get sicker, I get sicker. And everything around me, my family, my husband, our jobs, everything's shifting at the same time. We went into lockdown, I believe, a week after I had gotten sick. And so I look back on that, and I think the meditation intensive that I had done was certainly in preparation for what was to come, which was a battle. It was quite the battle for this timeline. And as I got sicker, luckily I knew I had heard that cytokine storms were what was causing quite a bit of the fatality rate. And so I remember one night I was in bed and a process started happening in my lungs. And it's interesting talking about this now, and you can still feel a little of the intensity. But I could feel my lungs get hot and then cold and then stiff. And this cycle started to happen over and over again. This hotness in my chest, this almost like a coolness, and then feeling like bricks in my lungs. And I knew I put two and two together. And this is credit to the linear brain, the analytical mind. I was like, thank you. It does serve us sometimes. And I knew those were cytokine storms settling into my lungs. And I also knew that if that goes on for too long, your lungs get destroyed to a point. This is really the immune system attacking itself in many ways, mediated and accelerated by the virus itself. And so I knew I was in trouble at that point. And I'm glad that I knew it because I think that also had a huge impact on my ability to be here. And so we went to the hospital. I had to say goodbye to my husband at the door, which is still to this day one of the most difficult things I've ever done. I was in a wheelchair because I could not walk. I had lost quite a bit of strength. My heart rate was all over the place. I was having neurological issues. And they wheeled me into a quarantined unit by myself. And that's where I stayed for a while. And when I was in that space, there's something about being in quarantine and being scared. And they had some drugs that they were starting to test at the time. And they told me, we don't know whether this will make your condition worse. It could put you on a ventilator. But it also, we think, might give your immune system enough of a recovery that you can pull through, right? And so ultimately, I made that decision. And I was so exhausted at the time, I was like, you know what? One way or another, let's just full send this, right? And so I ended up taking the drug, which to this day, I don't remember the name of, but something in the realms of antiviral, anti-inflammatory. And so, not to get into all those specifics, because ultimately that's not as important, but when I was really sick, and this is where it got interesting, and in this whole time frame, it's very hard to describe this because I was kind of in and out of this realm. And I was seeing this lifetime, this man that I mentioned, in that liminal space. He kept on coming up. And I came to understand through this almost meditative experience of just being so out there that he had gone off to war. I knew this to be a lifetime. I believe, as we've talked about here, that past lives are simultaneous lives. It's the soul fracturing itself, not splitting, but just focusing is a better term, focusing itself into different times and spaces, different experiences, and then being those experiences being reabsorbed and balanced. And the facets of the soul is finds its way to balance and clarity. And so I was aware of him. He had gone to war. He had been injured. There was also a pandemic going on at the same time. And he'd come back home and his family had passed. Everybody had died from the pandemic. And he was devastated. And so I saw him bitter. I saw him contracted. I saw him as a hermit. And I'll kind of interject this parallel experience as we go through this near death experience. So there's a few things here that are interesting. One of them is I could feel death as an energy, as a presence. Not as necessarily a personification, but just as like, oh, and I like to liken it to an old friend showing up at your door that you didn't expect. That was death. That was what it felt like. It was weirdly familiar. Like we've been there before. I've been there before, which we all have, right? And so that was really interesting. I became aware of, I had a knowing while I was in this liminal space that this was an exit point for me in my life. This was a reset point. This was a karmic point. It was going to happen, not as a punishment. People ask me that. They're like, "Oh, do you think this was like a reset?" And yes, and I don't view it as a punishment. I view it as an opportunity that was offered. And there's so many gifts that I got from this experience. Not that I wish I ever have to go through something like that again, but I understand why I did. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without it, right? So it's kind of hard to say that was a punishment, right? It's just not how I see it. So one of the moments where it was the most, you could call it interdimensional. I did not go into the light, so that was not my experience. But I was in and out of my body. And there was one moment that is kind of the most pivotal moment was when I was very sick. I was emotionally, mentally, physically exhausted. And I was on my side. I remember very clearly. I was on my right side, kind of curled up in the fetal position. And I just surrendered. I try to explain this as I just gave it over to life, not in a way that I gave up anything. I gave forward. I gave forward and back. I just became surrendered. And it wasn't a mental doing. It was a becoming. I was just surrendered. I talk about this in accessing elevated states of being, is when you fall back and allow yourself to be caught by life. That's the best way that I can explain it. And the resistance is gone. I just stopped fighting in that moment. I was just completely with the experience. And it was such a relief. It was such a relief. Simultaneously to that happening, a presence entered into this kind of astral experience. And I could feel it echoing into the physical experience, if that makes sense. Told you we're going to get trippy. And this presence was intelligent, it was loving. And the reason, should back up a bit here, the reason it came into my experience is because simultaneously to that surrendering, where I just gave in to life in a way that life could respond back to me. And there was something from my higher self. So again, this is life comes from you, right? Not at you. And so if you get out of the way, if you get that resistance out of the way, which I did deeply, then something can come forward, right? And things can all of a sudden be rearranged in this miraculous way. And so there was something that reached out or connected with, and that allowed, it wasn't a cry for help, it was just a opening. It was just like an opening. And because of that surrendering, because of that resistance being removed, and because I was open to receiving support on multiple levels beyond the conscious mind, that allowed this experience to come in. And people ask me, what was that being, that intelligence? And I'm always very hesitant to say definitively because I don't ultimately know. But what first showed up for me was Yogananda. He's an ascended master. I was reading his book at the time. He was very present in my experience. And it was some sort of intelligence like that, like him. And when this intelligence, this being came into my experience, there was an activation of my central channel. So this was at this point in my awakening, I was pretty familiar with the energy, my own energy centers at this point. But I could feel my first center, the root. I could feel it light up in my body and kind of outside of my body. And then the space between my eyes, the third eye, and then the heart. It was like bing, bing, bing. And I was like, whoa, back in my body, deeply present, completely surrendered, absolutely receiving, aware of this intelligence, this loving intelligence. And some people, they say, is it God? I don't know. That's not what came forward for me. I think it was I talk a lot about different levels of source kind of consolidation. So that pure source, that God, that oneness. And there's all kinds of intelligence in between where we are and where that is. And so that was my knowing, that was my experience. And I knew at that moment that I was going to be okay. I wasn't out of the woods in the physical realm yet, and it did take me a year to recover, really longer than that, to be honest with you. It had really ravaged my nervous system, my cardiovascular system, in ways that medicine just quite frankly doesn't completely understand. It certainly did not understand at the time. And so there was a lot of nervous system work that was to be done, which I'll talk a bit more about. But that was a gift. And I was aware that I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay, which you hear sometimes in NDEs that there's a grief in coming back. And there was to some degree, for sure. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of emotional stuff I had to integrate. But I also knew that I wanted to stay. And I later realized, because I was really confused for a while because I had done so much spiritual work, I didn't think I was afraid of death. I was like, why was I so motivated? Like, why did I want to stay so bad? And one of my dear teachers changed my life when he said, you weren't afraid of death. You're not afraid of death. You were afraid of not living your purpose in this lifetime. And that resonated. You know, when something just is like, that is truth. That is truth for me. And he was absolutely right. That was what was going on and is what happened for me. And so that's why I think I stayed. But I was very aware that I could have gone. And who knows? I think it's all okay, right? If I had. But I tell you one thing, after having that experience, and I'll share one more element of it that I've talked a little bit about before. After that experience, there is a deep degree of clarity that comes forward. And that sounds cliche, but I mean, once you've faced basically your worst fear, then there's something that happens within you. It's like, well, if that's my worst fear and that's what happened, I think I'm okay. Like, why do I need to keep up the charade of supporting that fear? Why do I need to feed that? And so my relationship to my body completely changed after it. And it continues to shift. But the degree to which I was a hypochondriac and was so insistent on managing the body, on managing the body. And I was like, you know what? The body is incredible. It has an intelligence that is all its own that we just need to get out of the way sometimes. Right. So now I speak to my body in a much different way. I'm like, I know you've got this. I know you've got me, and I've got you. So that was a big, profound shift. Now, the other element of this that was beyond time and space actually happened when I got back to my house. And I still had a hard time walking. I had made it down to one set of stairs, made it down to our fire escape on our bottom level, went out on it, sat down in the chair, looked up at the sky, this beautiful blue, amazing color that seemed very foreign to me for some reason. And I had a profound moment of presence, of just awe, stillness, peace. And it was a very simple moment, but a profound moment. And I thought about it quite a bit in the years later. I was like, that was an interesting moment that it was really etched in my memory. And then I'll bring you to about a year ago, little over a year now. I was in a meditation for about 3 hours. And I talk about this in our most recent Inner Sanctum on Substack, Experience the Heart as a Portal, because I experienced the heart opening, could see the energy kind of coming out, then a wave turned back on me, and it carried me through space and time. And I landed on the fire escape, standing, facing my past self, sitting down in the chair. And it was absolutely profound because there was a communication happening across space and time between past me and future me. And what I was feeling, I knew this to be true. What I was feeling in the past while I was just starting recovery was future me, was healed me, was more powerful and worthy me. And to be in the presence of that at that moment in my past was transformational. I just didn't know it at the time. And so when all those dots connected, and I'm sitting there looking at my past self and just having so much admiration, so much recognition. Like when you truly are in the presence of your future self and your past self, you become very intensely aware of how far you've come. There's a deep appreciation that maybe and quite likely you just didn't have until faced with that. And I was like, holy smokes, I was in awe. The experience was awe-inspiring. Changed my life. And I walked around my old apartment for a little bit and then ended up coming back. But I've had similar experiences where I go to my future, but that is for another podcast. So, that for me was my near death experience. I danced with death. I went into that liminal space. I had contact with interdimensional love and intelligence. I had some sort of spontaneous healing or alignment. And I experienced surrender in the midst of pure chaos and eventually traveled across space and time to heal myself in some ways. So I hope that that's, if anything, interesting, stretches the mind a bit to what's possible, stretches, or rather reminds us of how powerful we really are, and why this technology that I talk so much about, that I am so passionate about, this inner technology is yours. It is yours to activate and turn on and use in the most powerful ways. This is who you are as an interdimensional being. And these experiences, in my personal experience, are reminding us of that potential. That life is not what you see just with your human eyes. We have limited senses. This is another sensory system to bring online, to use, to travel with, to communicate with. And the amazing thing about near death experiences is that not only for the individual experiencing it, it usually it does open up a whole new realm. Their life is never the same. My life will never be the same. You can't unknow or unsee what you saw and what you experienced. You just can't. There is no going back after an experience like that. So it is very much a gift. Is it terrifying? Yes, it was terrifying. Was it a humongous gift? Absolutely. Absolutely. And then in the years, I would say like the year after that, I had to do a lot of deep work. And the best way that I can describe this is my energy had come so far up and out of my body. I was having a hard time with my lower centers. And I knew it. I was having a really hard time with bringing my energy fully into my body because it's almost like, the cat's kind of out of the bag and it's like, I don't want to go back in the bag. Why would I go back there? Like it's way more interesting out here, outside of time, and certainly not in this body that's having a really hard time right now. And that's understandable. So there was so much patience that was needed. I mean, I was an athlete. Like I was a big time athletic person. I'd done martial arts. I'd been on the US team. I'd traveled the world. And so to suddenly have a body that is just not doing what you are used to is devastating. It really is devastating. And so learning to work through that, and like I said, developing a new relationship with the body, a different relationship with the body. And I'll share with you practically two things that helped me do that. One, of course, no surprise, meditation. I was able to hang out in that liminal space and remind myself of who it is that I really am. And to be unlimited and to bring as much of that unlimited experience into what was a very limited experience and to start to balance that out, which was very difficult to do. I'm not going to lie. It's very difficult to do. And the one thing and take what works for you here, but the one thing I did not do in this recovery is I did not let myself buy into any labels. For me, being like a long COVID person or sufferer, just for me personally, I just didn't want to take that on. I was like, this is temporary. this is temporary. This is not my life. This is temporary. And to this day, every now and then I have physical things in my experience that I'm like, ooh, that could be an echo. But still, to this day, this is temporary. This is temporary. My body is has incredible intelligence, and it knows how to find balance. That's my work. That's where I focus. And one of the things, other than meditation, that really helped was breath work. And the reason I think breath work was so critically important is that, especially what I call mystical breath work or transformational breath work or holotropic breath work. This is a 3-part breath. This is a long laying down journey. For me, that particular process helped me to reset my nervous system. And it helped me to get beyond the conscious mind in a different way than through meditation. And I was able to process grief. I was able to process frustration. I was able to process anger through the breath work. So I was doing that very regularly because it was rebuilding me from the inside out. I really believe that. And I'll give you one really practical example. One of the first sessions I did after all of this happened. I don't think I've ever shared this. I had done a breathwork session and had a big emotional release. And the beautiful thing about breathwork and why I love leading these experiences, and we will at the Soul Pod retreat coming up in April if you want to join us, is that it clears the way. And what I realized is this so much grief came through, but what I realized is I am here. It was the first time I was like, no, I didn't leave. I'm here. And I know that might sound weird, but when you go through something like that, that is traumatic. And just having this moment where you're like, oh no, I'm here. Like I'm on the planet. I'm in my body. And like allowing the body to accept that is the best way I can explain it. And it was so emotional because there's the grief, like I said, on multiple different levels. There's grief of being out so far and being seen by this highly intelligent, loving being. There's the grief of returning to a body that's not functioning. And so breathwork helped me to work through these elements that were latent, subconscious, difficult. It really helps you move these energies. So I highly recommend that kind of breathwork journey when you're really looking to move through some sticky stuff. And there's just only so much that the conscious mind will want to enter into at any given time. So it gives you some space. It really did give me some space. So that was my recovery, was meditation and breath work. And then eventually Kriya. Kriya was very important to me. It is very intentional. It's yoga, it's union, it's breath work, it's meditation. It's not flow yoga. And that's what to this day I really enjoy teaching. It's a spiritualized yoga. It's a liminal experience. And you're delivered to a specific elevated state of being as an opportunity, as an invitation. So, I think I'll leave it there for today. If you have any questions about my experience, drop it in the comments. I hope this is helpful. I hope it opens your mind to what you're capable of. And I send you all lots of love. Till next time. Thank you for journeying with us today, Light Being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we want to invite you to explore the SoulPod app, where you can immerse yourself in daily lessons, guided meditations, and breath work to develop a soul-nourishing daily ritual and tune back into your own inner guidance system. You can download SoulPod in the App Store or directly from the show notes to start your free trial today and awaken the ancient wisdom within you.